You've managed to get your money together to outsource your MVP, but did you know that the vast majority of non-technology founders who outsource their MVP fail? The problem is that software agencies are not set up to support non-technology people building technology businesses. But do not fret, because there are things you can do to increase your chance of success from please make the pain stop to excellent, I actually have a business now and I haven't wasted my money. In this video, I'm going to take you through the 5 ways you can avoid software agency hell. My name is Matthew Reynolds, and over the past 20 years, I've taken scores of non-technology founders through the process of starting up and scaling up their businesses. And on my channel, I publish content to help people like you go from idea to real technology business without feeling like you've been dragged through a hedge backwards. Okay, so here's what we're going to go through in this video. Prelude. We're going to have a look at a story from my own personal life that will frame the discussion. And don't worry, unlike most of the stories from my personal life, this one will be interesting. 2. Useless vendor. We're going to dig into the issue of being unlucky enough to choose a vendor that is simply incompetent, which in fairness is the less likely outcome. 3. Building the wrong thing. A much more likely outcome is that you end up choosing a good vendor, but they end up building the wrong thing. Okay, so let's get on with it. Let me tell you a story that I'd forgotten about until I started thinking about the script for this video. Years ago, I bought a flat and it was off plan, i.e. it hadn't been built yet. And one day I get an email from the project manager that says that he's very sorry, but the structural engineer has found a problem. Basically, they had done the roof loading calculations wrong, and unless they added some structural steel into, I don't know, somewhere in the roof, the building would collapse. He said he was very sorry, and he said that it would add about 2 weeks to the move-in date, but they would absorb the cost. That's really like having a technical co-founder or CTO, Chief Technology Officer, within your business. How much did that construction company pay for that structural engineer? If that person was a consultant, that work maybe cost them £400. If they were employed, maybe £200. Just that one insight saved that project from catastrophic failure. You can imagine how it happened, e.g. the engineer might have just been lying in bed, and just as they were nodding off, suddenly they had this wait a minute moment where their unconscious competence popped up and an awareness that something was wrong, and now they're in that mode where they had to find out what was wrong, and voila, they did. That is the sort of insight that you need to have within your business. Getting support from competent people who are going to have those wait a minute moments is incredibly valuable. And that's precisely what you get when you have a technical co-founder or CTO within the business. They are the people that A, know how to build a roof such that the entire building won't collapse 2 days after the work's completed, or B, are able to spot mistakes on the horizon and give you and the team a rest of a chance to fix things. But if you're seeing this video, the YouTube algorithm is such that I can assume you don't have a technical person within the business, and that's cool because I do content to help people who don't have technical people within the business. And it can be done. You don't need the person, but you do need the skills. If you want to outsource your MVP development without facing the risk of failure, that's the gap we need to close. We need to get you to know how to find the skills externally. But before we crack on, if you're still trying to find a software agency to build your MVP, check out this video, also in the description, as in it I go through how to shortlist and select an MVP. 1. Incompetent vendor. Putting this video in 2 parts lets us look at 2 types of risks. The first is that you choose a vendor that straightforwardly can't do the job. This is the equivalent of choosing a cowboy builder to build an extension on your house. You just got unlucky. To define the term incompetent vendor, this is a vendor where regardless of how good you are at describing the project, the work they do is just substandard. Happily though, it's actually quite rare to choose an incompetent vendor, because much like in the 1980s where it was possible to buy a bad car and now all cars are built to kind of like the same high quality, these days it's quite unusual for vendors to be bad. The problem as a non-technology founder though is that because you're new to the activity of commissioning software, the warning signs that the vendor is just straightforwardly useless are quite opaque. What you need to do is rely on somebody else qualifying the vendor for you. You should be relying on a recommendation from someone that you trust. This will remove the cowboys from the scenario. If you don't have or can't find a recommendation from your direct network, you would do best to socialize a request on LinkedIn via your second degree network. I would definitely not try and find someone directly. Using Google or relying on an approach from a cold email or a LinkedIn direct message, I would not touch that with a 10-foot pole. You need a personal recommendation, otherwise you just don't know what you're getting. 2. Building the wrong thing. There's a 20% risk that you choose a vendor that's straightforwardly incompetent, but if you ask for a personal recommendation, I would say it's pretty easy to avoid. 80% of the risk then sits in getting the agency to build the right thing. How do you do that? Let's break it down. A, you need to know the philosophy of how agencies work. B, you need to know how to specify your project. C, you need to know how to oversee a project. D, you need to know how to test and evaluate outputs. And E, as a special bonus, you need to know how to sequence a pilot project. A, how agencies work. From my perspective as someone who's been building software for 30 years, software agencies work in a really strange way. The first issue is that software agencies exist to augment existing software teams, not to be a business's only software team. This means that your engagement with them as a non-technology founder cuts against the grain of how they're supposed to work, as you don't have any technology team to augment. By default, they are going to operate as your whole software team. Coming back to my example about the structural engineer, we need those technology insights and skills, but you don't have a person to put them in, so you have to find them elsewhere. You have a challenge here in that you need to get the agency to provide those skills for you. In my experience, agencies will do this, but they have a bit of a habit of getting carried away and taking over because they can smell your money, and agencies like clients that can keep spending money with them. Specifically, your outsourcing agency should be a delivery partner, not a technology partner. The distinction is that you are building a technology business and you don't need a technology partner because you are one. It's the equivalent to cloning and marrying yourself. Any partner that you do have should be complementary to your skills, not just a carbon copy of what you should be able to do. The way you do this is that you need to frame their engagement with you as advisory rather than executionary. You need to get them to a position where you know you can trust them to give you good advice, but you still make all the decisions. This means that over time your objective is to wean yourself off of using agencies completely. As a technology business, you will need an in-house team, which means that when you get to a point that you are scaling up the business as opposed to starting up the business, you will have your own developers in-house. The second issue with agencies is that they operate on rails. They will only build what you tell them to build. This makes sense if you consider that they get paid purely on outputs. Your project with them will likely have a fixed cost, and if they have to do more work than they budgeted for, they will make less profit. The reason why the software engineer part of me finds this strange is that if you imagine yourself in 5 years' time when you do have that in-house team of software developers, in-house teams tend not to be concerned with how much things cost to build. This can cause its own problems, but what this means is that they tend to do the right thing rather than the purely profitable thing. Practically, this translates to a higher level of adaptability of application. It sounds a bit academic, but it's actually really important and is a very common way in which non-technology founders get screwed by agencies, although not deliberately. It's just a function of how agencies work. Imagine you have two parallel universes, one where you have some money to build an MVP and use an outsourced team, and another with the same amount of money to build the same MVP, but this time with an in-house team. You present both teams with an objective, which is that not only do you have an idea, but you have a potential customer who's willing to operate a pilot project. The problem with pilot rollouts, which we'll come to in a minute, is that people tend to forget that there will be learns that come from that project. That pilot project will prove some product market fit, but you'll need to do more work to close in on a more optimal product market fit post-pilot. The first universe where you're using an outsourced agencies will build you a piece of software that will do just what the pilot project needs, but most likely the output will be brittle in that you will struggle to modify the outputs to apply the learns from the pilot project. This happens because agencies are motivated to optimize profit, and it usually follows that as you add flexibility, you reduce profit. Therefore, they're not adding in the flexibility you need to go from pilot through the learns to the next version, because that would be anti-profit to them. The second universe where you use your own team, the output will likely be much more flexible because in-house teams build to optimize longevity. And when it comes to software longevity, that is achieved by adding adaptability. And from there, you can make the software more flexible. In the second universe example, you are more able to take the learns from the pilot project and take those into the next version of the product. So this is a good thing. To square the circle, what you need to do is, as we were saying before, use the agency to give you advice around how to make the product more flexible and try and tease them away from this mentality where they operate on rails. Just be cautious though, because what you don't want them to do is add in so much flexibility that they just double the cost and give you something overly flexible. You have to get a middle ground. B, specifying software. Just give me a moment as I need to stop myself from getting triggered by the trauma of trying to get people who don't want to write specifications to write specifications. People hate writing specifications, but the truth is, the better the specification that you can write, the less money you will waste. In all software projects, a percentage of the money that you spend is wasted. And by waste, what I mean is that you pay someone to write a piece of the software, i.e. some lines of code, but those lines don't make it into a final usable product. The better your team is at writing software, the smaller the percentage of waste. You're never going to hit 0% waste, but 1% or 2% is fantastic. How waste works when it comes to the agency is that there is some internal waste and some external waste. They too cannot hit 100% efficiency in the work they do internally, and you have no control over that, but they bake that into the cost. The external waste is the bit that you have control over. For example, you might be designing your pilot project, misunderstand what the customer wants, ask the agency to build it, they do build it, and you give it to the customer and the customer says, what's that? That's external waste, and that is the bit that you do have absolute control over. The way that you control external waste is to be better at writing specifications. Writing specifications is a big topic. Look for other videos on my channel about how to get better at writing them, but let's do a quick run through. The first thing about writing specifications is that you actually need to do it. It's like going to the gym or sticking to a diet. You have to turn up and do the work. The temptation, just like it's easier to buy a nice cake from Sainsbury's and sit down in front of Judge Judy all afternoon as opposed to driving to the gym and wailing on your pecs, is that you rely on the agency to write the specification. This is never a good idea because you need to be in control of the project. Again, you're trying to make the agency a delivery partner, not a technology partner, and this means you need to be in the driving seat. The person writing the specification is the person in the driving seat. Don't be a passenger princess. You really can't skip this step, but people do, and it leads to really crappy results. The second thing about writing specifications is to err towards keeping the language more clipped and structured as opposed to prosaic. Most of us in business settings are taught to write in a way that is quite dense. Formal business writing in the form of reports creates something that requires a good deal of concentration to get through. If you write a software specification in that style, people just get bored. There are two tricks where you can draft your specification so that it's more readable and comprehensible, even though it's likely to be quite a boring body of work, whatever you do. No one is going to WH Smith's at Heathrow and picking up a copy of your software specification for entertainment on a long flight. The first is that imagine you're writing for a social media post rather than a report. Because everyone online skims read, social posts that get read and get engagement tend to be single short sentences, one per line. The second trick is to use the must, could and should rule, which is where you ensure that each short sentence has at least one of must, could or should in it, and ideally capitalized to increase reading comprehension. Here's an example of a very short part for specification, which is written in a prosaic narrative style. Once the user is logged in, they can see a list of plots within the building site. They can select the plot that they're interested in and then select add snag to add a new snag. A new screen appears that allows the user to take photos of the issue and add a description. It's not necessary to take any photos, but it is necessary to add a description. Here's an example of the same specification written as short sentences in a must, could, should style. The user must be able to see a list of plots within the building site. The user must be able to select a plot. When they have selected a plot, they must be able to choose an option marked add snag. When the user selects add snag, they must be presented with a new screen. The user must add a description of the fault. The user should be able to upload photos of the issue. The user must be able to select an option to save the snag to the database. The purpose of writing in this way is that it removes ambiguity. It so happens, if you've never written software before, it's closely aligned with how software itself is constructed. This means it's very easy for a software developer to look at this and know exactly how to build to these requirements. All the questions they have are in there. For example, it's really clear about whether photos are required or not. That requirement happens to be in the first narrative specification as well, but it's easier to find and comprehend in the second draft. Once you know how to write a specification like that, it's just an issue of making sure that you have complete coverage of the product you're trying to build. This should work out because the agency will not be able to quote without having a proper specification. Although a gotcha here is that agencies do quote without a proper specification, which is a surefire way of ensuring that one, the other, or both of you get burnt because the quote will be too low and the project will require heroic efforts to fix. Don't accept a quote from a supplier unless it's against a fully fleshed out specification. C. Know how to oversee a project. You'll know by now that I'm keen to labour this point that your agency should be a delivery partner, not a technology partner, and part of this is the oversight part. The agency should be doing the project management of the project. That bit certainly is a core part of the service you're paying for, but you need to oversee it. It's not that you shouldn't trust them, it's just that some healthy cynicism is likely a good investment, plus you're looking to control the project whilst they manage it. A good agency, i.e. one that's managed to deliver enough projects and get to a scale where you feel comfortable enough to commission them, will most likely have good internal internal project management practices because it ties directly to their ability to make a profit. What you absolutely need to do when outsourcing software is to convene a project board, and the supplier needs to report into that project board. In a bigger business, the project board would need to have representatives from the end user, the supplier, and the commissioning organisation, along with any other stakeholders. As a startup, it may only be you in the business. The tame customer that you've lined up for the pilot project is likely not wanting to make that bigger commitment to sit on a project board, and you also probably don't want them to see what's going on behind the curtain anyway, because you're on a learning journey and things are likely to look a bit sketchy to outsiders. From the supplier, you want both the project manager / account manager and the senior technician who's on your project. I would suggest if you're a one-person organisation, you should find a friend who can also sit in on the board to advise you and act as a proxy for the customer. They may do this out of love, or you may need to find some way to repay them for their time further down the line. This gives you something that looks like and should function like a proper project board, even if you're at a smaller scale. One of the reasons you do this is that you can smoke out problems from the agency side. A common problem, especially for startups, is that your work might be less important than the other clients the agency has at that time, and you can get shadow deprioritized. You can end up with your work not getting the same engineering input than other projects. If you have regular project meetings, you can detect this and stop this from happening. Another reason for doing this is it's exactly the sort of practice you need to embed as you transform into a proper software business. D. Know how to test and evaluate outputs. The reason why I added this one in is that in my experience over the last 20 years, the best clients I've had in terms of them getting fantastic outputs from the work they've commissioned through internal or outsourced teams have been the ones who were better at testing outputs. It's fair to say they also had an X-ray laser focus on what the customer needed and what the product should do, i.e. they were really good at product. But the more care and attention that they took personally to testing that the outputs aligned to their vision of what the product should do, they had more success. And I think that's all I have to say on this one. My observation is that you get consistently better results the more you test. That's contingent on the supplier actually giving you things to test, however. So that links back to the project board stuff we went through before. Make sure they are regularly showing you whatever sausage is coming out of the sausage machine, and use the project board to make sure that's happening at a cadence where you keep seeing outputs. E. Bonus. Sequencing a pilot. I'm adding this one in here because it's top of mind for me because of some things that have happened over the past couple of weeks. And although I did some shorts on it, I think it's worth having in this evergreen content. I alluded to this earlier in that a really common situation that screws founders up is that they laser focus on the pilot project and forget that the pilot project will throw up some learns that require more development to get to proper product market fit. Another way to put this is the pilot project usually reveal that there is some product market fit, but the level of product market fit will always be somewhat poor. Founders have a habit of putting all the money they have into developing the MVP for the pilot project and don't hold anything in reserve to apply the learns from the pilot. This can leave the founder stranded with a product that doesn't work and is unsellable, at least until more money can be found, and oftentimes more money can't be found and the whole endeavour is for now. The analogy is that you're flying a plane and island hopping. The first island you land on is nice for a short break, but it's not where you need to go. Don't end up stranded. If you're asking me how much money you should hold in reserve, it's a how long is a piece of string question, and I don't like those, so I will offer something. It's not 10%, it's not 50%. I would suggest you hold a third back. For example, if you've managed to find 75k to build your first MVP, you might spend 50k on the work to deliver the pilot, and then you have 25k to get to where the pilot project told you that you needed to get to. Cool, so we're all done. If you work through everything we've been through in this video, you should significantly de-risk your MVP outsourcing project. Some YouTubers have sponsors, but I sponsor my own videos. So here's a message from me, my own sponsor. If you're a non-technology founder starting a technology business, I have a self-paced course on my website that takes you from the idea you have to getting a fully operational and profitable real technology startup. I'll show you in the course how to get your MVP built, how to find product market fit, how to get traction, and from traction either build your pitch deck and financials to get seed investment or turn that traction into the cash flow you need to get from startup to scale up. If you'd like to learn more, there's a link in the description, or just head to fractionalmat.com/course. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.